Hi, good evening, everybody. 6 o'clock now on Wednesday, October the 21st, and we are here in the CR room of the Carson City Community Center. And it is time to begin this evening's episode of the Carson City Airport Authority meeting. And Tamara, if you would, please call the roll.
Chairperson Hutter.
Present.
Vice Chair Peterson.
Here.
Member Posick.
Here.
Member Shirk.
Here.
Member Stotts.
Here.
Member White.
Here.
The quorum's present.
Thank you very much. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first order of business tonight is approval of the minutes of the September 16th meeting, and copies of that have been distributed. Are there any modifications needed to that minutes? Seeing none, I'd need a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
We'll call that a motion by Member White and a second by Mr. Peterson. And all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, if there be any? Okay. The minutes of the September meeting are approved. Modification of the agenda. The chairman reserves the right to modify the agenda in order to most effectively process the agenda items. Tonight, we'll have no modification to the agenda, and we'll run our public hearings in the order published. Item number E, public comment. Members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority may speak on both agendized and non-agendized matters related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic, and if your item requires extended discussion, we can discuss potential calendaring of that matter for a future Airport Authority meeting. Do we have any comments from the public? And as you are coming up to the podium, if you would, as I've been asked by our recording secretary, please write your name on the log as opposed to sign your name on the log so it's legible. And for the record, let us know your name.
Jerry Vaccaro. Okay, I appeared here before, probably 2 or 3 meetings before, and been waiting for you people to bring up on the agenda the topic of your hobby hangars. Hobby hangars are people using the city airport property and the hangars for personal hobbies, not aircraft. And in the FAA grant money that you're receiving, and you've received since '98, between $22 and $25 million from the federal FAA, okay? And we've asked before, I had documents from the tax assessor to see if there was a balance, and I'm having difficulty finding out the total amount of hangars on city property and the total amount of aircraft on city property. So for me to do an audit, I think we need some accurate figures, maybe from the airport manager and maybe from the tax assessor, but it's understanding that the city makes its money from the taxation on the improvement of a hangar on city property, and then also the content, that being an aircraft that they pay a personal property tax on. I think it's out of balance. I think every one of you people on the board are aware that there are hobby hangars on the airport property. You've spoke to me maybe individually, maybe different occasions. You have approached me in the parking lot for not having a handicap sticker presented on my dash, as you know, so
You're mistaken. It wasn't me.
Yes, it was you.
What's my name?
Stott, whatever.
Mr.
Right
Stotts,
out
you
here
don't
in the
need to
parking
respond
lot,
to
you
this
stopped
from
me
the
and
audience.
You said, what am I doing in a handicapped parking lot? Where's your tag?
You're mistaken. I never approached you about the
I'm
handicap
sure it was
parking
you,
lot.
believe me.
You're wrong.
Okay, we need to move this
All right,
along, Mr.
okay.
Stotts. You don't need to respond to that. Mr. Vaccaro, get back to your point.
Okay, so what I'm asking for is an audit somewhere in your association here that we get a total count of the hangars on city property, the total amount of aircraft that are in those hangars, and the amount of taxation collected on those, and then how do you compensate the taxation on the people that have no aircraft in the hangars, that have maybe automobiles, boats, RVs, campers, trailers, whatever? How do you get taxation out of that? So what I'm saying is, if you say the reaction that you people are not tending to this, if it is presumed what you're doing is legal by taking the FAA money grant to be used for the airport, if that is legal, then let us advertise in the newspaper that you have hangars available for other business people or other people that want to use it for storage, because right now you have the cheapest storage in Carson City. When you give a lease for 50 years and an annual fee of 25 cents a square foot, okay, there's nobody can compete with that in Carson City for storage, okay? Not a mini storage, not a commercial building. All
Okay,
right.
that's about 4 minutes, so if I'll give you another 30 seconds to finish your comment.
Okay, how do we get answers to this legal authority? He has no contract. He's been representing the airport authority for 10 years on what we call a letter of engagement. I think that this should be put up for bid for other law firms to bid on this, or better yet, have the district attorney represent this. You're a city asset, and it should be represented by the district attorney's office. The hobby hangars have to be addressed immediately. And I don't know how you're going to do that, how you're going to inspect, or how you're going to audit it. But if it's legal, then let's advertise it and let's make it available to the general public. This is online. If you want to get this, read
We
it.
have that.
And you'll know that you're in violation. Okay?
Thank you for your comments, Mr.
All right.
Vaccaro.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the public? Again, please write your name and state your name for the record.
My name is Bill Hartman, and I have 2 items.
Okay. This is a sign. I'll pass this around.
That's the sign that's on the flight line pointing towards the runway and the flight line that people see when they come to the airport. And as you can see, it's in pretty shabby condition. The black border around the edge of it is just falling apart. The sign itself, you can see there's paint coming off. It's really a mess, and it needs to be replaced, in my opinion. I talked to Steve Reynolds at Sign Pro, and he can make up a new sign for $350. Now, the new sign would screw on to the existing wood frame, which is 2x6s, and whatever wood backing there is there, which is still has substantial strength to it. And the sign he would make would probably have a lifetime of at least 10 and probably 15 or more years. So my request to you is for you to tell me to take this to the airport manager so that he can then contact Sign Pro and have the sign made.
Excuse me, you're not agendized to take action. You can only take comment at this point.
Correct. And that's what we're doing is receiving that comment, and we can certainly follow up with airport staff.
Okay? And if you decide not to tell me to contact the airport manager to do it, then I would request that you, as an authority, figure out what you want to do concerning the sign. Okay?
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. You know, it is certainly one of those things where we want to be a warm and welcoming place and look like we're in good shape. And I'm glad that people are taking notice of the condition of our facility. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. My second item concerns agenda items 4 and 5. And I'm requesting that you, Mr. Chairman, remove them from the agenda. A few weeks ago, I investigated putting in for the vacancy that's on the authority, and so I got the information sheet about it. And on there it says that the airport authority oversees the activities, operations at the airport. It does not say that they conduct or manage these activities. In my opinion, items 4 and 5 have to do with conducting and managing activities at the airport, which are, in my opinion, the manager's job, not the job of the authority. So my request then is that we move items 4 and 5 from the agenda, give them back to the airport manager so that he can take care of them.
Well, thank you for the comment on that. We will move forward with our agendized items. We are committed to conducting them. Thank you. Do we have any other comments from the public? Hearing none, we will proceed with our public hearings. Item F on the agenda. Beginning with item number 1, discussion and possible action regarding approval of the Carson City Airport Authority audit for fiscal year 2014 and 2015. And we have Beth Cohn with us tonight to help us out with that.
Good evening. I left at each of your spaces a copy of the audit and the 2-page required board communication letter. First, just reviewing the communication letter. Basically, that's just a summary of estimates that are embodied in your financial statements, your responsibilities and our responsibilities, and potential adjustments that we recorded, which were primarily accrual basis adjustments. In 2015, generally, Governmental Accounting Standards Board issued a new statement, number 68, on pension liabilities, which now requires local governments to report your share of PERS net pension liability. And PERS provided that information to you as an authority and to us as auditors. So those numbers are now reflected in your government-wide financial statement. So that's new and that's unusual. So I'm pointing that out at the beginning. I did spend a couple hours with Member White and your airport manager reviewing this in detail, so I will summarize and then take questions. The audit opinion that we provided is an unmodified, or what we call clean audit opinion, which is what you want. In addition, we audited the financial statements for in accordance with the single audit because your federal funds exceeded $500,000, and that also was clean. And we provided the audit in accordance with government auditing standards, and that opinion is also with no compliance or no instances of noncompliance that we noted. So I'll briefly review the results with you. And I'm going to point to page 8 to start. On the page numbers are on the bottom. So the first column in this statement of net position or balance sheet is your fund or budget basis financial statements. Then the next column are the adjustments to your government-wide financial statements. So in 2015, at June 30th, you had approximately $690,000 in assets. Once we added the capital assets and prepaid leases, your total assets increased to approximately $1.1 million. The new items relating to GASB 68, or the net pension liability, increased your liabilities about $203,000, and some deferred inflows of resources, again, part of this pension requirement, of an additional $63,000, so that reduced your net equity. So your net equity went from approximately $257,000, $258,000 to $260,000, which is an increase, but that's because of capital assets also. But your budget basis is that first column, your general fund. The next page represents the statement of activities. And again, starting with your budget basis, you generated revenue of approximately $1.8 million. Your expenditures were about the same, just slightly higher. So you expended about $72,000 more than you brought in prior to property taxes. You brought in approximately $202,000 in property taxes for an excess of revenue over expenses of approximately $130,000. The next column are those adjustments for the net pension liability and accrual basis adjustments, and we had to book a prior period adjustment to implement this new accounting standard, and that's reflected also in that column. Page 11 through 21 represents the footnotes to your financial statements. Pretty consistent with prior years, except for 3 pages relating to this new pension liability. Takes up a lot of space. Your budget to actual is the last item I'd like to review on page 23 and 24. You budgeted total revenue of approximately $1.7 million. With FAA grant revenue, your revenue exceeded your budget by approximately $300,000. Your operating expenses for the airport operations were budgeted at about $341,000. Your actual results were less than budget. They were $298,000, which was $43,000 better than your budget. And then you incurred costs in connection with that FAA grant. So, and those costs exceeded what you budgeted, because depending upon what project you were working on, by about $200,000. And the rest of the financial statements relate to those reports I mentioned. So this year, we did not have that finding regarding over-expenditure. You do have an over-expenditure in the FAA grant, but I don't believe that is a compliance finding in accordance with NRS 354.660. So it's mentioned there, but it's not necessarily a compliance finding. I know that was short and sweet, but
I'll open up with a question just about that last subject, and thank you very much, Beth, for walking us through that. The additional capital outlay over, I should say, above budget, maybe I'm looking at Jim here as well, is that with regard to rescoping or having changed projects that we pursued after the time that the budget was struck, or what's the reasoning on that?
That's correct. What happened was the FAA offered to fund Phase 3 of the main apron ahead of time than what we had originally budgeted. So.
Right, which is, yeah, I wanted to hear somebody else say that, but yeah, that was what I would presume it would be, is that sort of acceleration of that. So our matches against those capital outlay, again, the matching portion of our grant, just for the education here, is our matching portion of the grant similarly categorized as a non-compliance item, or would that fall back in the section of sort of?
I treat it as a non-compliance.
Okay.
I mean, not as a non-compliance, because you receive the additional revenue and the matching portion is minor.
Right, but theoretically, you know, that obviously came with an increase in our outlays because of the match. The match was slightly higher if the grant was slightly higher.
Right, but your actual expenditures were 44,000 better than
Below,
budget,
correct.
so you were fine.
Right, because of other things being under budget.
Right.
Right, great.
Primarily your legal costs were.
Thank you. Questions from the authority? Member Bostic.
I have one. On page 4, about in the middle of the page, said that operational activities provided revenue of approximately 500,000. The budgeted figure, this is last year's budget of 480, 534. Is that
Where are you?
middle of the page on 4, one sentence, under financial
Oh,
highlights? Is what you're trying to say there is we did better than our budget?
You did better than your budget,
So who do we give the attaboy to?
Steve. His legal management, but
Well,
Steve's
Tim
legal.
Rowe.
Yeah.
I'll get it.
And
attaboy.
Steve.
Okay.
But, yeah, management, you really have controlled costs quite a bit. You've drilled down your budget. Last time you spent, hours on that budget and have drilled it down. And anything that was higher, you generated donations for your open house, et cetera, so.
Rebuilding the coffers. Other questions from the authority? Treasurer felt this all looked good?
I want to thank Beth for putting up with my myriad of questions. As you all may well expect, there were a number of questions. I think this is a pretty good report.
It was a very enjoyable process.
Thank you.
Well, excellent. So I suppose the action that we would need to take is to approve this audit. Is that correct, Mr. Takis? Oh, right.
That's correct.
But
After the
before
public-
getting to that.
yes.
Yep. Thank you, Beth. And is there any public comment with regard to the audit? Okay. Hearing none, then we'd be in need of a motion to approve the 2014-2015 audit.
I would move to approve the 2014-15 audit as presented.
Okay.
Second.
Motion by Member White, second by Member Posick. Any further discussion on this matter? Any further discussion or comment from public? Seeing none, we need a vote. All in favor? Aye. All opposed, if there be any? Hearing none, the audit is approved unanimously. Which moves us on to item number 2, discussion and possible action to approve Robeson Engineering to conduct yearly unmanned aerial vehicle operations to survey the gravel pits and mines located approximately 2 miles or within 2 miles north of the Carson City Airport. And we have, is it Mr. Brashears?
Yeah, my name's Nick Brashears, and I'm one of the pilots for Robinson Engineering.
Welcome.
And I've kind of got on my computer the area in question and different things about the craft and our COA pulled up. So Robeson is a civil engineering company. We do surveys, cartography, things like that. And the Cinder Light Pit, who's one of our questions or one of our clients, we do a lot of walk-in surveys for them, or a walk-in survey once a year for them. They're on BLM land and they're required to report their how much the volume of dirt they take out to the BLM, and that's something we can do a lot easier and cheaper with the UAS than a walk-in survey, and so we'd like to make that available. But because of our COA and I think it's one of the NRS statutes, we would either need to apply for an additional COA through the FAA, or we can enter into a letter of agreement, and we'd rather go the letter of agreement route, just because Carson's a small community, Rena's a small community, and we'd like everybody to be involved and not kind of just do it. So the area in green is the Cinderlight pit in question, and that's the area we're specifically asking to fly. We've got a built-in safety buffer on top of that, and it's about 2 miles north of the airport. Here is the gravel pit, once again, in a topographical map, and the gravel pit sits at about 5,000 feet, give or take, and the top of the hill is 5,400. Per our COA, we fly less than 200 feet or less, and we don't think that there would be any traffic problems or anything with other aircraft, because at 200 feet in that area, you'd be flying into terrain, so you've got other problems. And it's kind of tucked up into a valley as well. And then we were one of the first COA or 333 exempted companies in northern Nevada. Our craft is 846 Romeo Echo. We've been assigned an IN number. It weighs 1.5 pounds. It's made out of EPO foam. It's a relatively safe it's a very safe airframe. There's videos of the people from the company flying it into people and doing all sorts of goofy stuff, and it'll destroy the craft before it'll hurt anything as well. And like I said, we've never had any GPS problems, any safety problems with that airframe. It's been incredibly reliable. Ask for questions. And then, you guys have any questions for me?
Well, I'm sure that we will have quite a few. Let's start out. Member Posick?
Two things. Insurance?
Yeah, we carry several $1 million in liability insurance. It just as part of the business. So yeah, we do carry liability insurance, and the craft itself is actually insured.
Okay, I just know that the FBOs have to indemnify the airport authority against damage. Would you be prepared to do that?
Yeah, I believe we could do that.
How about the operator also using a radio to inform the airport area and/or Unicom that you're doing such an operation if it was approved?
So we usually file a NOTAM about 72 hours in advance. The earliest we've ever done one is 24 beyond 24 hours, and that's actually required by the COA. We flew just past where we were legally allowed to fly in Reno, and just to make sure everything was kosher with them too, we get on the ATIS there. So there's NOTAMs out, the ATIS, and we are getting a handheld as well, so we can talk to aircraft.
Okay. Any other way of notifying? Because I do know, being at the airport every day, we do have pilots that don't read NOTAMs or even listen to the ATIS.
I requested that if this is approved and they do begin operations, to call me in advance. I will put it in the remarks section of the airport weather observation system.
Other questions from our authority members? Member Shirk.
I'm just curious, after you take all of this, what do we do with all this information? What is the basis for doing this?
Like, what kind of information are we collecting with the UAS? So we can do a couple things. We can actually make three-dimensional models for asset management, and I've actually kind of got this is a full three-dimensional map for point cloud without, but we just pan through the model. So this is kind of like the information. This is at the Borealis mine. We can also strip away the terrain features and create topographical maps. I know some people with the same craft will go out and help farmers, after they've plowed their fields, they can go through and count hay bales and do asset management as well. These guys were, I believe, looking to extend one of the pits or just seeing how their mine was currently laid out. And we usually cater to mines, gravel pits, things like that.
Member Pearson.
This question may be really for you, Steve. In your briefing on this, you said the COA prohibits operations within 3 nautical miles of an airport having a published instrument flight procedure, and that we are within that 3 miles. If that's the COA, and it's prohibited, how are we empowered to exempt him from his own COA? I'm confused on that point.
Yeah, the COA, the Certificate of Authority, which is what we're talking about, the COA, is the FAA's mechanism for granting authority for unmanned aircraft operations. And the COA that was issued to Robeson Engineering is 400 feet and below, and it really doesn't have a geographic area, but it has those additional criteria of being a certain distance away from certain airports. So an airport with a instrument approach, it's 3 miles. However, the FAA interprets that and the Section 333 exemption to allow airports to make agreement with the operator to let them come in closer. In addition, that precise issue, actually the same question you asked, was asked at the legislature when AB 239 was approved. AB 239, you may remember from last month, is the state law that says if you're within 5 miles of an airport, any kind of airport, you need to have an agreement with the airport to operate. So the short answer to your question is yes, if you agree to allow them to operate closer, that's consistent with the COA and the 333. Part of your exercise is to determine what kinds of things do you need to feel comfortable to allow Robeson to do these operations.
And just a side note, we only plan to fly there like once a year, so it's going to be very minimal.
That was actually going to be one. My question is, what is the frequency of the operation? And as you just said, it's fairly infrequent, and indeed restricted to the specific area in green that you illustrated.
Yeah, and the letter of agreement too, we've got it typed out in a way where you guys can cancel at any time without any notice to us. Just in case we do something you don't like, you can immediately void out the letter of agreement.
I haven't seen that, so that's something that we'll need to look at. There's one additional thing I should note is the requirements under the FAA, both in the COA and the 333, is that they have to see and avoid piloted aircraft, and they have to remove their craft from any area where there's a potential for an incursion with a piloted aircraft. So part of the idea is they have to be in visual flight rules, unaided visual flight rules. Doesn't mean you can use binoculars and say, hey, I can still see it through the binoculars. It has to be unaided within that distance. And they have to be in a position to avoid any incursion with manned aircraft if they're a manned aircraft operating. Now, as Matt, is it Matt? Nick mentioned earlier, the area that they're surveying is up in that area that's like when you're crossing from Reno to Carson or Carson to Reno. And so when I first looked at this, I was a little concerned about that. But if I understand them correctly, the pits that they're actually surveying are down from the peaks. So if you were flying through there, more than likely you would hit a peak before you would hit their little UAV. And so I think that's a somewhat comforting factor.
Yeah, I think to Mr. Tiggs's point there, it was very helpful for me to see, for one, the exact map and the topography you're talking about, because I think for those of us who fly out of the airport, yeah, you'd be in a different kind of challenge if you were 200 feet above the surface at that location in a GA aircraft. And I agree with Mr. Tagus that, the departure and more likely the arrival from the north, where, we probably, much to the chagrin of the Duck Hill folks, come over the ridge line there for that overhead break to the downwind. You overshoot the altitude in the area that you're referring to. So I think that is a meaningful piece of this, kind of the tucked in location of this specific site. I think it's also worth noting that I believe you said 1.5 pound foam vehicle. this won't be the last time we talk about this subject at this authority, I'm quite sure, as time goes on. And I think we're going to find that a lot of it's in the details. Is this a 40-pound UAS in one location or a 1.5-pound UAS in another? So these things are all important, I think, in the details, as are any stipulations, if we were to approve this, that we bring in, such as the notaming, which of course is part of the COA already, but the update of the AWAS remarks, I would certainly feel a lot better, all things considered, with the, knowledge that you had a handheld and the operator or an operator's assistant was monitoring and communicating on Unicom.
And both the operators, including me as one of them, we're both licensed pilots. We both fly pretty regularly, and like safety to actual aircraft is really important to us. And like we've got our pilot's license at stake. The company's got the little UAV, even though it's EPO foam, costs $60,000, and all the trouble of like going through the COA and everything. Like we've got quite a bit at stake, and so safety is like our utmost priority, and that's why we're here today.
No, thank you for that. I mean, I think that adds context, and also specific knowledge that I think is helpful when having an awareness of what our GA pilots likely to do and not do with full-sized aircraft, if you will, or manned aircraft. I think that knowledge ends up being very helpful there. Any other questions at this time from the authority? I guess at this point I'd turn to the public for any questions or comments on this topic. Okay. Well, I understand, as you said, that you have a draft LOA that I think that will be very helpful if we were to move forward in then being reviewed by legal staff in particular and airport manager to understand what changes, if any, would be necessary to comply with the Nevada regulations or any stipulations that the authority might require. Is there anybody, I should say, on the authority who would like to venture a motion on this? Vice Chairman Peterson.
In the interest of not having it be a recurring agenda item, I think we probably move forward. I propose that we move to approve the request of Robinson Engineering to operate their equipment and unmanned aircraft within 5 miles of the Carson City Airport under the terms of the 333 exemption and with the following conditions: that the Carson City Airport be a named insured and indemnified against any damages, they operate below 200 AGL, that we are exempting them from the 3-mile limitation in their COA, and that they be operated line of sight unaided at all times, and that it be notamed, and that the airport manager be notified so it can be put into the AWAS.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second it.
Seconded by Member Stotts. I might ask, Vice Chairman Peterson, you had a good and brisk list of stipulations there. The one that I did not hear was the requirement to monitor the Unicom frequency, to have a handheld radio and monitor Unicom. Is that one that might be welcomed?
I have no objection to adding to those limitations that a handheld radio be available and used to monitor the local traffic activity.
Is that good by you, Member Stotts? As the seconder?
I agree with that.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion and a second, and further questions and comments from the authority. Mr. Posick.
Is this contract obviously going to be signed before you make any operations?
Yeah, we don't have any plans to do anything until October of next year, so it'd be done well before then.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, we don't know about that. Any other questions from the authority? Comments from the public? Okay, that brings us back to the authority and call for a vote. All in favor of the motion, and Tamar, first off, you got the motion the way you need it? Okay. All in favor of the motion as presented, say aye. Aye. All opposed, if there be any? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously, and I'd ask, as I see is happening in real time, Mr. Brashears and Robeson, get in contact with airport staff to work out drafting of that LOA, and if the terms as were approved will be included in that, any modification of that LOA, and Mr. Takis will verify that it meets all the other requirements of the 333 exemption, the federal regulations, and the Nevada state regulations. I think we'll be in good shape. So thank you for the presentation tonight, and well done. Thank you. That brings us to item number 3, discussion and possible action on written notification from Cricket Communications of their notice to terminate their antenna lease on the airport tower, and potential action for acceptance, rejection, or counter offer against the offer of Cricket for cash payment and disposal disposal of equipment. We'll leave it at that. Mr. Rowe, get us started.
Okay, as briefed previously, I've received the termination letter and equipment transfer agreement from Cricket Communication through ARQ Wireless, their representative in this matter. The revised termination letter is effective tomorrow, and they will basically cease the lease 60 days from tomorrow, which is December 22nd. Cricket is offering a $15,000 pay and walk fee. In other words, they give us $15,000 and they walk away. However, there is another agreement that I sent along with it and handed out. There's a company called Cell Tower Resources that has offered to remove and dispose of the tower equipment, including batteries, radio equipment, cabinets, not including the coax and antennas. The CTR will incur its own expenses in the removal of the equipment, and the one could possibly be a problem is that there is no timeline on the removal of the equipment. It's just whenever they're in the area. So we need to work that out with this company if the authority chooses to do so. Give you a rundown of what's out there. The antennas, there's about 6 antennas. It's right at the very top of the mast, just below the rotating beacon. The cabling or coax is the only coax that goes up through the middle of the tower. All other Verizon, AT&T, Clearwire, they are external to the tower. So it's really not a problem that I can see removing that coax. I don't know if it's going to have value or not. I really don't know. But the antennas at the top, the coax, not a problem identifying it. The box with the batteries, other equipment involved is on 4. It's not a very big box. It's maybe 4 feet tall, 2 or 3 feet wide. It's stainless steel, and it sits on 4 legs that are footings, not a concrete pad. Very little to remove it. And it's just sitting on the south side of the Verizon vault, which, of course, Verizon, AT&T have the lion's share of the antennas and equipment on the tower. Current lease payment from Cricket is the airport receives $1,174.83 per month, which is $14,097 a year. So basically, if they were to give the airport $15,000, they're paying a lease for 1 year to the airport. And that's really all I have, unless you have other questions.
Okay. Well, there are definitely questions. The amount Their current lease is scheduled, how much early, to what extent would they be terminating their lease early?
With the, a letter of agreement that they sent, their lease officially terminates tomorrow for their 60-day notice to terminate. So it officially terminates basically on December 22nd.
And my question is, December 22nd is how much, is leaving the term of their lease early to what extent?
Steve might have those numbers. I don't have that number.
It's a 30-year lease that began in, sorry, did you know when it began? Okay, started, that sounds about right. Yeah, it started in 2002.
Okay.
It's a 30-year lease, but it's actually 5-year lease renewable for 5 additional terms, so it's 6 5-year terms.
Okay, and there's no termination penalty that's described elsewhere that we would be surrendering in exchange for the $15,000?
Well, the way the lease is written, they can terminate at any time upon a written notification to us that they're terminating the lease. And then upon that notification, they have 120 days to remove all of their equipment from the site. So they have an obligation to remove their equipment.
Right, and that's where I think our discussion will center. I just wanted to verify that there wasn't some other penalty that we would be in exchange for taking their $15,000 surrendering, you know.
No, they have the right to terminate their lease at any time. Anytime they find that the use of our tower is not suitable for their needs. And I don't, there may be somebody here from Cricket, I don't know, who might be able to answer that as well.
Okay. Member Peterson?
What's in front of us is partly the termination from Cricket, and then this other discussion yet to be had about somebody who wants to remove the material according to an agreement or a contract before us. They're related. We really can't decide one without considering the other. And I just want to give an opinion. I've been around some hazardous waste situations that blew up in people's faces very badly. And you, Steve, certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but what I encountered in those situations was at some point, if there is hazardous waste, there is an owner. And that owner is responsible no matter what happens to it. I could hire Joe Bob's hauling service, and he says, yes, I'll get rid of it for you, and they discover it later in the creek. It's my problem because I did not use a certificated or licensed person who was able to document it all the way to its point of final resting in an approved hazardous destruction site or storage site or what have you. In an earlier world, the word battery wouldn't have scared me, but we now have in large bold print the word hazardous material. And there's a discussion about we get paid $15,000 to essentially assume ownership of whatever is hazardous material, and that kind of means in perpetuity. And then we've got an agreement by somebody I don't know, and there's no language in here in which it really says he is taking ownership. He will remove and dispose. He's just a hauler. He's not acting as a purchaser of all of the liability of this hazardous material, meaning it would remain with us. And he can go dump it in the Truckee River along with everything else out there. At which point it comes back to us at some future year. So, as I said, I'm having to address this really as two separate pieces that are interlinked. And I would say that based on what I'm seeing on the disposal agreement, the one from Cricket gives us ownership of this future risk in perpetuity. The disposal agreement leaves us with the ownership. And it's an indefinite time at their convenience and with no statement that it will be in accordance with the regulations on hazardous material disposal, and there's no insurances to protect us. So I just want to say that I see this as a non-starter, the disposal. We're just hauling Joe Bob's hauling service as far as I can tell there. And if that's the case, I would say it's not worth $15,000 for us to take on the risk in perpetuity of all of that hazardous material out there. So unless, I just want to, maybe you know something different than I do about hazardous material, but I have some experience in disposing it and people going to jail.
You may have a great deal more experience than me. I just wanted to add, there is another aspect of that that is troublesome, which is if you sign the agreement that Cricket has proposed, and we find out later the batteries have been leaking for a couple of years, Cricket's no longer on the hook. If we don't, if we just make Cricket follow through with the terms of the lease, namely to remove everything, and then we find out there was contamination, Cricket is still on the hook. And so there is that liability issue as well. Cricket was purchased by AT&T not too long ago. We did verify that ARC Wireless has authority to act on behalf of Cricket, and that actually went up the flagpole till I got to AT&T, who in fact confirmed to me they do. So if there were a problem in the future, we've got a pretty big company out there that could step in and take care of it, as opposed to, some fly-by-night thing where, maybe you would never be able to get back to them anyway. But that's another liability concern. And in my briefing memo, I expressed a bunch of concerns about the disposal agreement, because it's kind of when they want, what they want, and as Tim mentioned, we'd have to tie it down. Well, if you approve this agreement, it's not tied down, and that's bothersome. And is there somebody from Cricket here? I think we need to find out, because I'm kind of curious as to whether they've got somebody who can stand up here and say, here's what's involved and here's what we'll do. Because at this point, I know they've asked to have tomorrow be the effective date of their termination, but frankly, they can ask till they're blue in the face. They need to send us something in writing saying we're hereby terminating our lease. It says it has to be in writing, terminating our lease as of X date, and that begins the 60-day clock. And I was hoping that there'd be somebody here, but it doesn't look like there is.
I did request that letter from Cricket, from Mr. Cockrell at ARC Wireless, and I have yet to receive anything. I can't say that my communications with Mr. Cockrell have been very beneficial. It's almost like he's a guy on a cell phone. So I think that it would be prudent for us to demand a letter, and you guys decide.
Well, I don't know so much we have to demand a letter. We continue to charge them rent until they give us the letters. What I'm saying is, until we get the letter, these phone calls where they're saying we want the effective date to be tomorrow, no. I mean, look at the terms of the lease. A phone call doesn't do it. But I don't know that we demand it. I mean, we might as well collect the rent as long as these guys want to not terminate the lease.
Member White?
I have to agree with Member Peterson on the hazardous waste issues, and as well, all this cloudy communication. I believe we need to stand on the original lease, and when they terminate, Cricket should be responsible to remove everything and leave nothing behind. And I'll let you know, I base that on some inside information that I have. I have a friend that is in the cell tower business, and his advice was tell Cricket to remove everything, stand on the lease that we have.
Just quickly, Member White, some of the other detailed reasons why we might want to stand on the lease, because it is a good, strong legal document with a big company that transfers all the risk to them. I was just curious, in your conversation with your friend, was there any particular reason, did you get into the level of detail of why you would want them to take out all of the infrastructure? The power meter, the pad, the whole nine. That's the part that seems like it would be, if you could split the baby, have benefit from.
His experience is when you start letting that lease fall apart and parts and pieces go here and go there and other people get involved, it doesn't go well.
Yep. Member Peterson?
The last thing I'd add, it's tempting to look at, $15,000 and Joe Bob can haul it off and we get a little bump in our budget. One of the cases I was familiar with was a Goodyear tire store, and they had spilled some oil out back, and they had an inspection, and the EPA said, you got to haul it out. And they hired an actual approved guy to haul it out, to clean it all up, and they did that. The manager, who was going to hit his store and his personal bonus was going to be impacted by this, said, well, okay, I'll finish the cleanup, and swept some of the dirt back in the hole. Now, the oil was gone, and you and I probably would have been happy with the dirt that was swept back in the hole, but that didn't comply with the infinite detail required by the EPA. His personal fine was $15,000. This $15,000 could evaporate like that. I see it as a non-asset in exchange for any potential hassle. So whenever we get ready, I would be quite happy to make a motion, or anybody else can, that says we just expect Cricket to stand by the terms of the lease. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think there are two camps I see arising, or two themes. One is is pursue further the shortcomings of the documents, and there's plenty of things to question here, as in Mr. Takis's briefing he's pointed out, and the comments we've heard tonight. The other major line of inquiry is actually a more positive action, I think, that Mr. Peterson was just suggesting, which is perhaps put all of that discussion aside and simply decide to stick with the lease. I think there's a lot to be said for what Member White brought up, which is, it's come up in a couple pieces, and that is what we have here, barring more expert analysis of what is or isn't in that shed, how nasty or not nasty it is. We're not in a position to really evaluate that. And even if the risk is the likelihood is low, the risk and what we could entail the airport in is high. And, I tend to think that sticking with the clear-cut lease is a smart way to go. I guess the part just personally that's on my mind is, as I asked you, Member White, do you really, have to take it all away? Could there be something beneficial? But the cost in terms of muddying up the crispness of the agreement and saying, hey, it's out of our hands, I think outweighs that. Because, and Mr. Takis, something I was going to ask you is, there were things in the, I think, termination and transfer agreement that are curious, and you pointed them out. What other obligations of Cricket to someone might there be? Similarly, in the disposal agreement, I think a lot of vagary. But we haven't specifically, beyond your report, actually heard from you. So please, what are your thoughts, Steve?
I just wanted to comment that they are not required to remove underground utilities that have been run to the spot. So you get to the pad, I'm pretty sure, and Tim might know, that the utilities run under the ground, so they don't have to tear that out. So we still have utilities to that pad area. However, they are obligated to remove the pad and dirt up to 2 feet below it to restore it to its original condition, and then remove all of their equipment, including the coax and the antennas and the antenna mounts and whatever, and the batteries and whatever else is out there. So it's fairly complete in terms of removing things, but I did want to mention it's not the underground utilities. So in the event that we were to find another person who wanted to utilize that portion of the tower, the logical thing for us to do would be enter into a lease with that person along the same lines in the same place here, knowing that the power is already run to the area. And that is the highest spot on the tower, which is kind of interesting because when I negotiated this original lease and tower construction with AT&T, AT&T chose a spot on the tower and they didn't choose the highest spot. They had done some engineering and it determined the second to the highest spot, I think, was the optimal place to be, and that's where they put their equipment. So when Cricket came along, I think they jumped at that highest spot. I know that Verizon was not really happy to get the lowest spot on the pole. And there may be an option, too. There may be an opportunity for us to go back to Verizon or somebody who's low on the pole and say, hey, for a little bit more money, we can give you the spot up high, in which case we would definitely want to have had Cricket remove their stuff so that we don't have complications there.
I think that's well said. And I just add the comment that, we've talked about risk. We've talked about, whether it's hazardous materials or other legal risk that could offset what is, $15,000 feels pretty attractive when you have a budget the size of ours, but could offset that and more quite quickly. I would say that just given the status of the questions that have been raised about the documents you have in front of us, let's not forget, I would suggest that the legal fees that we'll incur to continue the conversation, polish these things up, chase down the details, are worth at least a couple thousand there as well. So that might be another consideration. Member Posick?
Yeah, I had a question. Joe Bob or this CTR, if they were to take responsibility for this equipment, does that release us from the liability?
I guess maybe one step, maybe slightly more clear than maybe Mr. Peterson, what you were saying about the disposal agreement. The word transfer is used a couple times in here. Agree that the equipment being transferred is as is, where is, but yet it's a disposal agreement. Mr. Posick, to your question, I think that the way it's phrased right now, it is really not clear as to what responsibilities CTR is taking on at all, if any. Member Peterson?
Mr. Posick, to add to that, we don't know if there's zero, a lot, or in between hazardous risk. We don't know if they've leaked into the dirt. I shared with you a story where it was just some motor oil that spilled on some dirt and created tens of thousands of hassle from the EPA and the cost to dispose of it. If you face one of those, it will quickly consume the money. It's a common practice among some companies, and I can think of one that we did some business with in the past, where they have a big hazardous problem, so they sell the company that has the problem to essentially an empty corporate shell that has no assets. And so then they go off on their own business, and years later the problem is discovered, and the lawsuit is presented to a company that has no money. AT&T has assets. If there is a problem, we can go get them. If they own the responsibility for having created the spill there, we can go get them. CTR, we know nothing about them. We don't know the depth of their pockets. So given the size of any penalty, quickly taking the 15 grand, my position is I'd rather have a deep pocket backing us up if a problem occurs at some point in the future rather than that 15 grand.
Any other comments from the authority? Comments from the public on this subject? Why did I go that way? That was too early. It's because it's quickly becoming too late. We would then potentially be in need of a motion in one direction or another, and I think I hear one coming. Mr. Peterson.
I'd like to move that we reject the offer from Cricket for termination and equipment transfer and instruct them that we will entertain a termination notice with no changes to the existing lease.
Okay, motion from Mr. Peterson, second by Member White. And further discussion from the authority. Now, would there be any comment from the public? Hearing none, I would call for a vote on the motion. All in favor? Aye. All opposed, if there be any? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously, and I guess Mr. Rowe will convey that information back to your contact, that the lease will continue as agreed, and that they can send us a written notification of their intent to terminate, or of their termination, and that will be our signal to start the termination process in accordance with the lease.
I'll do that.
Item number 4 on the agenda, discussion and possible action to approve a temporary notice to airman publication regarding the UAS field located within 5 nautical miles of the airport until a permanent remark is published in the Airport and Facilities Directory. And I think relevant perhaps to a comment earlier, but more perhaps to our action at the last meeting. Before turning to Mr. Rowe, I'd ask Mr. Takis, is the reason why this had to be agendized for this meeting because, I mean, technically, that direction, if it's in this board's purview to issue that direction, couldn't be issued last week because it was not an agendized matter?
I have to ask Tim. I don't know why it was put on the agenda. I know that the NOTAM, the requirement to put the NOTAM was not part of the agreement that the airport authority approved. Instead, you guys said we were going to leave that to Tim to take care of the NOTAM. I don't know. Maybe Tim can answer why he put it on. I don't know.
The only reason that I put it on was it was requested that it be reviewed. And so that's what I brought it in for, just to be reviewed. I'm ready to go with it right now.
And is the agenda item that you brought because there's specific copy or text that needed to be reviewed? I mean, I don't recall from our discussion. I mean, it's appropriate that this was not part of the agreement with the RC field because we were saying that we're the ones to publish the NOTAM and eventually the AFD change, with the NOTAM being a temporary measure until the AFD change is enacted, which I believe is, of course, our... Yeah. But again, I'm not sure that there is action required on the authority's part to carry this out. The airport manager has the authority to issue NOTAMs, and you do that on a fairly routine basis when required. So unless I'm really missing something, I don't think this is an item for authority action.
I'm okay with that. It's just that I put down in my notes from the last meeting that that the authority would like to review it. I wrote it down, so I put it on the agenda. But I am ready to do it. It's an accurate depiction of exactly where the RC field is and their area of operation. So I can put this in tomorrow. On a side note to that, once this NOTAM is published, it automatically goes into the paperwork for the airport facilities directory. Once it is published in the AFD, the NOTAM is discontinued automatically.
Great. Sounds like there's a process, and you know how to use it. So I don't know what the...
So you don't have to take any action. You don't have to do anything further on the item. The one thing is, if you read the draft language that the Lockheed guys came up with, it's hard to follow. I mean, I read it, and when I glance at it, it looks to me like they're describing an area that's a half-a-mile radius of the Carson City Airport. And I think what they're trying to say is it's a half-mile radius of a point that's off on a bearing 2.7 miles from the Carson City Airport. But
and unfortunately, that's the standard way that those things are compiled. And they, without the graphic tools to actually plot that to a map, it's very hard. But that is, unfortunately, I don't think you're going to get them to budge on that. That's just sort of how they do it.
Once it goes into the AFD, it is written in plain language. And this is the way that the NOTAM tech explained it to me, because I was having trouble with it too as I was writing it.
no action needs to be taken. You can go to the next agenda item.
Okay, so we're all learning here every day. So there's no action, there's no specific wording to not take action on this, right? You just don't do it. Okay, Mr. Rowe, have at it and get our NOTAM filed. Brings us to item number 5, discussion and possible action to approve the airport manager to engage in environmental inspection service to inspect the airport terminal building for possible environmental hazards. Mr. Rowe.
For some time, as in my briefing, we've had a mold problem at the airport terminal on both ends of the building and underneath the roof of the main building, or what used to be the restaurant. I never noticed it until a few weeks ago when somebody mentioned that it has a pretty bad odor. And we were visited by Amy Gibbons of the FAA environmental specialist from the Phoenix ADO. she was doing a kind of an impromptu inspection of the airport, and she just looked at the terminal building and said, "You need to get this checked." So that prompted the agenda item, and so I'm looking for some approval to get quotes and engage a company to come in and look at the building. Just tell me what I've got.
Just ask a question.
Yeah.
Is this something, maybe Supervisor Shirk knows, is this something that our Carson City environmental person, Ken Arnold, could look at and determine?
I've checked with health services, I've checked with the building department, and they both told me that I have to go to a private company to have that inspected. Of course, once the private company issues their findings, then the building department, health services, then they get involved.
Sorry, for the record, to tell us how much we have to spend. I think that this is an interesting, obviously, I think it's in everyone's interest to understand what we've got there. I think with the recognition that we're then going to have to do something about what is found. This is a budget question. The fact that it is actually, whether it has anything to do with our airport funding or not, I mean, the fact that it was pointed out by our FAA friends, it lends some color to this. But the question would be, in what area do you feel, do we have contingency budget for something like this? And if so, how much is programmed into your facilities budget?
I received a tentative quote from a company out of Las Vegas, actually. We were just calling around, and we got one response of approximately $3,500 to $4,000 for the inspection. This does not include any mitigation. So roughly that's what it's going to cost to have it done, I suppose. We'd have to get 3 quotes and try to go with the lowest one. As far as mitigation, that's a whole new agenda item.
Member Peterson?
Do you have a copy of any report generated by Inspector Gibbons from the ADO? And if so, can you share it, or was this purely a verbal comment from her?
This was a verbal comment.
Can we expect a report from her visit? You said it was an inspection. That sounds like a real event, or was she on her way to dinner with friends and just stopped in to say hello? An inspection's a real event.
She didn't, it was not an organized inspection. She was looking around the airport. I was showing her around, and when we were finished, she looked at the terminal and said, you ought to look at this. Nothing formal, nothing regulatory. It was just a suggestion.
Back to this, and I guess it's to the general board. Member Shirk, you nodded your head yes as to perhaps having a city facility participate in some sort of an inspection to give us guidance. It need not necessarily be a formal thing, but it could tell us what to do. And the reason I'm asking that, this is city property. This is not a private property. It's not a commercial property. It's city-owned. And if somebody who had the knowledge said, hey, why don't you get a bucket of Lysol and get after this place, and some antifungal paint would be good, then that would fit a lot of people's idea of a budget. And if it in fact improved it to the extent that the next time Inspector Gibbons came around, she said, oh, good job, we've moved on. And mold and who knows what, just because there's a little funky smell after a brief patch of rain doesn't mean we need to tear the terminal building down. But I can easily imagine a commercial inspection company coming in and saying, here's your 47-page report on how to build a new building here. So I guess the question is, can we in fact get some expert guidance from somebody within the city who might recommend a short-term but effective way to approach this?
All I can do is ask, and so I will do that. I think the city staff is responsive to requests like this, and I can certainly come back and let Steve and the chairperson, Carl, know that what's going on after I contact them, And give me a week, and we can see what we can do. I'll get with Tim first, and then draft a letter, and then contact them individually and in person. That's the best I could do.
What would we do with our own houses? We'd see what we could do before burning the place down.
Well, I think that certainly taking a prudent course of action, and if there are resources in the city that are available, it's keeping it in the family so that you don't have someone with a profit need to tell you what you need to fix in your car. And at the same time, not wanting to back away from an authentic understanding of what we might have there. But if there is a resource that could still be pursued, so be it. And that would be, I think, the first choice. In the interest of, the fact that we only meet once a month, we might want to also, well, I don't even know if this is an authority action, to have Tim in parallel collect three quotes.
We don't need to collect 3 quotes. I mean, the amount of money you're talking is less than $5,000. It's well less than the $25,000. So,
well, let's just put it this way. I think probably there's someone closer than Las Vegas who can do this kind of thing. So, another quote?
well, no, if you want 3, that's fine too. I'm just saying, I don't think you're legally obligated to get 3. But yeah, you certainly should get some local quotes.
Yeah, and again, I think I would stress, my thought would be to get a couple quotes. Let's not act on that, certainly not before we have feedback from what Member Shirk might be able to find out. Member Peterson?
In the interest of actually making something happen, I would move that we table this agenda item for 1 month pending Member Shirk's research into the possibility of an in-house inspection and guidance, and that the results of whatever comes from that, plus Manager Rowe's research into other possible quotes, be reported at the next meeting.
Yeah, that is well said, Vice Chairman Peterson, and I tend to agree with that. So if we can go forward on those footings, and indeed we'll table this and bring it forward to another meeting. I see a hand in the audience. I don't know if we're in a position to, I think we would be, if it's a public comment, is that correct on this matter? Then we would pick it up at the comment portion of the agenda, right?
Yeah, no, people have to be allowed to comment on individual items. So
at this time?
You would take it, Member Peterson made a motion, but you don't need to do a motion and take action.
Member Peterson didn't make a motion. He said that he recommended.
Okay, well, but in any event, you don't need to do a motion to table it to next month. That's
correct.
That's something the chairman can simply do.
Which I just did.
But this would be a good time. You should be taking public comment on each item.
Okay, as we go.
Yeah,
rather than taking it at the end.
Yeah, ideally you're required to take it at the beginning, the end, and then at each item. And on the items, the ideal time to take it is before anybody makes a motion on the authority. Once a motion's made, the time for comment's over. Then it's just second and discussion among the board and a vote. So.
Well, we will take the public comment at this time. Mr. Hartman, come on back. Thank you very much. We're all getting this civics lesson as we go, and that's part of the fun.
Bill Hartman again. Based on some personal experience I have had with mitigation of, it was decades worth of pigeon poop in the Laxalt building, I would recommend you contact Buildings and Grounds, because they've had experience with this and getting people in to take care of issues such as this. So I think they're a good asset to get a hold of. That's all I wanted to add.
Great. Thank you very much for that.
And they're easy and local.
Thanks.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other comment from the public?
State Buildings and Grounds.
Okay. Right. If the city doesn't work for us in this case, maybe we can go to the state. All right. We'll keep the federal EPA out of that one, though. Okay. So we're going to table any further action on this till down the road and go forward with their investigations, which brings us now to number 6. Discussion and possible action to modify the Carson City Airport driving rules and regulations to change the number of warnings given to any violators of the rules. And certainly a matter of seriousness with safety implications. Runway incursions by vehicles are no laughing matter. And this is unfortunately a situation that seems to be a perennial problem. So, Mr. Rowe.
What prompted this agenda item was back on September 25th. About 5 o'clock, the state jet citation was landing at the airport when a car came speeding down taxiway Bravo and onto the airport runway. Mark Rasner, the pilot for this flying the citation, is here, and I'm sure he'll like to comment. I'll let him do that here in a second, but they came very close to colliding. And we've had a problem with runway incursions at the airport. There's not a lot, but there have been a few. Just last week, I caught a guy going across the runway who was lost, didn't know where he was. And fortunately, one of our tenants was meeting him, but he decided to take a shortcut to the gentleman's hangar. So I didn't chase him off the airport. I'm very polite most of the time, a little irritated, but I told the tenant to keep him off the runway, please. And haven't had that problem from that person since then. But we do have some problems in the driving rules and regulations regarding my ability to enforce the driving rules. One of those is the written warnings. I think it's a little ridiculous myself to have to provide 4 written warnings to anybody caught breaking the driving rules on the airport. Runway incursions, one thing, yes, I can probably do something immediately with that, but people do speed across the ramp, speed down the taxiways, the perimeter road, and I would like to have the ability to perhaps write 1 written warning and then take action after that. I'm not inclined to want to just take away a person's driving privileges, but I think that something should be done to allow me a little bit more leeway in enforcing these rules. That's what I'm asking for, is just please give me a little bit more leeway in enforcing the rules.
Mr. Tagus.
Yeah, Tim and I discussed this, and so the language essentially is saying this. Tim can give somebody a warning and there's no repercussion other than the person gets a warning from Tim. On the second warning, if Tim gives them a second warning, he can suspend their driving privileges for some amount of time. Typically, it would be some kind of temporary suspension. On the third warning, he can revoke their driving privileges. You're done, you can't drive on our airport. And the Carson City Municipal Code is very clear that we can eject people and refuse to allow them on the airport. And then we added a provision saying there can be immediate revocation for a single violation that presents an immediate danger, such as a near miss with an airplane or other safety violation that involves serious risk of damage to person or property. And that's because, frankly, if you've got somebody who thinks it's okay to drive down the runway, which is what I'm understanding happened, while the state jet is trying to land, that's somebody who clearly should not be on our airport. I mean, none of us, even if one of us thought, hey, I can cut across here and get across to the other side, none of us would ever drive down the runway. Anybody who's involved in aviation knows how dangerous that could be. And so there's somebody who shouldn't be driving on our airport. They obviously don't understand how airplanes and cars interact. So that's the language that I've put in front of you that Tim has requested, and I think it makes sense. But I'd love to hear the story.
Yeah, I think that, suffice it to say, if we are able to find out who this person was, that a revocation of driving privileges is in order. So, cutting right to that piece, and I'm sure we'll get right back to the language here, a question that came up in my mind is, so the statute gives, or CCMC, I guess, gives us the authority to eject people. What sort of support can we expect from Carson City in enforcement of that? Will the sheriff assist if we have someone who basically just gives the finger to the decision we've made? I mean, what is? I mean, I think this comes up in a few different venues. Even if it's within our authority to take certain actions, how do we enforce our decisions, and who will come to help us do that?
And that's a very good question. Our hope is that if you took action to revoke, or Tim took action to revoke someone, the code says they have an opportunity to come back and appeal that to you and get a reading from the board as to that revocation. If they don't do that, we would go to the sheriff's department with Tim's revocation saying, hey, he revoked it, and this guy did not avail himself of the appeal process. Or if he avails himself of the appeal process and you guys say, yeah, you're revoked, we would take that order to the sheriff's department. And then if we caught him on the airport, our inclination would be to call the sheriff's department and say, hey, we've got a trespasser on here. Clearly, we followed the action of law. He's not permitted to be here, and ask them to either eject him or arrest him for trespassing, whatever we think is appropriate. I should say we've run into a couple of problems in the past that have had a very interesting resolution. We had one guy who was extremely nutty, who would swear at other people on his radio. He's a pilot, and he would swear at other people on his radio, say things, very abusive things. I'm taking off on runway 9, when there was somebody who just announced they were going to take off on 27. It was dangerous and crazy. And then, to make matters worse, we tracked the tracks, his tire tracks. He decided that, we called the police, and the police had a chat with him. He also heard that we had called the FAA, who told us he doesn't have a pilot's license anymore. There isn't anything we can do about it. And we're going, the guy's flying around. He has no pilot's license. Enforce the law, But that was their response. And so when he heard that we had done those things and that we called the sheriff, he apparently took his truck and started driving over lights and signs, things that we had. And his tracks tracked right back to his hangar. So, I mean, it was not rocket science. So we called a deputy, the sheriff's department. They sent a deputy out, and the deputy was going to try and just have a talk with him. The deputy got so infuriated talking to him that he called the guy's wife, got him on the phone. He says, you come here, you take away his keys, or he's going to jail right now. The wife came, took away the keys, and fortunately the problem resolved itself. The guy went away, and he's no longer an issue for us. But the sheriff's department has been helpful to us in the past, but how it's going to actually play out in this instance, I don't know, because I was really surprised at the way it played out the last time, or that time.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I guess one other thought on that matter is, I wonder if that is considered a moving violation, basically in disobedience of traffic rules in any way that can be looped in there, or whether we'd have to rely on it as a trespass issue at that point.
Good point. I could look into that and find out. I mean, obviously, if we're going to revoke somebody's privileges or take some action, we want to have as strong a basis as possible for the sheriff to enforce or the DA to prosecute.
Thank you. Member White?
If we revoke somebody's driving privilege on the airport, do we have a mechanism to restore that privilege after a period of time in good conduct, or does this appeals process serve for that?
That's what, in the Carson City Municipal Code that we adopted in Title 19, that's what the appeals process is for. But you can always change your mind on things. I mean, if you revoke somebody and a year later they come back and they ask to have you reinstate them, and they give you a great pitch, and you guys say, hey, this guy's reformed, this is okay, there's a need for him to be able to drive on our airport, you could certainly do that.
Member Peterson?
Central going in the same direction on this. The only thing I would comment on in the new language, it says that in the event of an immediate revocation, the individual have the right to request a review by the Carson City Airport. I see no reason not to slightly expand that to in the event of a suspension or immediate revocation. It's the check and balance. You know, we don't know. Tim's a reasonable guy, but somebody might disagree for whatever reason, and we should give that person the right to appeal as well, I think.
Would that appeal theoretically happen at an authority meeting, or would that be something that would not have to be in an open meeting scenario?
No, that would have to be in an open meeting. You guys can only act in an open meeting, and it would require your action. So we would just delete the word immediate. So in the case of any revocation, or is it any revocation or suspension?
Or suspension.
Well, we have two different words here. There's suspension and revocation, and it's based on different series of events. There's dire threat to life, and there's 2 written warnings, but they all end in one of 2 outcomes. Well, 3 more written warnings, or suspension or revocation. And I would just expand the language to say that an individual has had their driving privileges suspended or revoked, has a right to appeal according to the terms written here. And I had assumed it would be at the next meeting per request to be agendized. You know, they would have to write in and request it.
A question that I have about the language as written, and I sort of highlighted this to Mr. Rowe, I guess a week or so ago. You know, the existence of section 1.5.2 that says based on evaluation of the circumstances, this current language, evaluation of the circumstances of the severity, the authority reserves the exclusive right to assess any penalty it deems appropriate at any time to any individual. I guess I had overlooked the fact that it says the authority, where in the clause 151 that we're talking about, it actually doesn't mention who the person is, but is it implied or stated that that's the airport manager who can do that, or is there any distinction? Is the airport manager acting as an agent of the authority in the case of these clauses?
Yeah, good observation. I guess my suggestion is the immediate revocation needs to be the airport manager because it needs to be immediate. There isn't time to call a meeting. So we insert the language by the airport manager after the word immediate revocation in the new underlined language. So it would be immediate revocation by the airport manager shall occur for single violations that present an immediate danger, et cetera. And then in the last sentence, we say in the event of suspension or revocation, the suspended or revoked individual or company shall have the right to request a review by the Carson City Airport Authority at the next noticed meeting.
So the implication is that where I was headed originally isn't 152 already saying this? Doesn't it already give the latitude under any circumstance to do it? And then it kind of occurred to me, that's the authority. And maybe 151 is really, even though it never uses the word manager or staff, means the manager or staff can issue these written warnings, issue a suspension, issue a termination, revocation. I think it makes more sense if that's how we're reading this. 151 talks about what the manager can do. 152 talks about what the authority can do.
152 kind of says you have a range of options available to you. The manager may be saying, hey, I want to revoke this guy, immediately revoked him. They come back to you and say, hey, look, maybe what I did was wrong. Why don't you suspend me for 60 days instead? And you guys say, yeah, I think we'll do that instead. That's what 152 gives you the ability to ratchet the appropriate penalty to whatever you think's appropriate. And so that's really the distinction there. I understand what you're saying. It'd be nice if we broke out the airport authority action in 152 and the airport manager in 151, but that's not really the way it's drafted. I mean, I can redraft it to do that, but you get there anyway with this language.
Mr. Peterson.
It may or may not be a useful analogy, but I had a neighbor of mine years ago as a police officer in Dallas. I mentioned something about him enforcing the law. He said, no. He said, police officers don't enforce the law. Courts enforce the law. We simply stop something in process and get them in front of the court. And they are, in fact, acting on behalf of the court, which is us. So I would have agreed with you that we are granting the power to the manager to stop an event, to interrupt the event, and either issue a suspension or a warning or revoke him, but subsequently they have the right to request a hearing here, which is where the real enforcement takes place. So I wouldn't have said there was any conflict there.
All right, did you? Other questions from the authority? Comments from the public or stories?
Roll video.
And if you would, please legibly fill out your name in the log. See, Tamara, I'm really pushing for you here. And state your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is Mark Rasner. I'm a pilot for NDOT. I'm not here representing NDOT. I'm just here to listen for myself because I was pilot in command on the state airplane during the incident. I understand you guys have a lot of policing to do with vehicles, and I can't say I know specifically what the rules are for the airport and the operation of the vehicles. Most pilots would say this is an uncontrolled airport, get out of my way. And I've seen and heard that before. From my perspective, I couldn't identify who that person was. And I don't know who it is, but just know that as a pilot in command on a transport category airplane with 11 people on board, that's interference with a flight crew. And from my perspective, that's a violation of the CFR, Code of Federal Regulation. So if I needed to make that person's life miserable because of what they did, I would have the authority, the capability of doing that. That's not what you all here are addressing, I'm sure. But I think if your basic concept is that you want to change it from 4 warnings with no teeth in it to something with more teeth, I would support that. That's my comment.
Well, thank you for your comment. And, I, for one, when I heard this story, it scared the crap out of me because, it could have been any of us who fly at the airport landing. And, I know how can be getting the citation stopped, and we don't have 11 people on the little CJ. Bad things could happen there. And I certainly, for one, would be in favor if we find out who this is, of doing what we can to ensure that, not only does this not happen again, but, that there's the appropriate follow-up. Because, I don't need to tell you. I mean, very, very bad things could happen. I would suggest even worse things if it was a takeoff roll rather than a landing roll.
Yeah, it was a little scary. I'll also say this, that everybody makes mistakes. And when confronted with them, usually the consequence of those mistakes often is dictated by the attitude of the person who's being warned. And if you find out who it is, I'm all for warning them not to do that again, assuming there aren't extenuating circumstances like they're under the influence or something like that. But, poor judgment, you warn them, they fess up to it and own it. If they cop an attitude, you need some teeth in something. And that's where I think as a flight crew member, I can pursue that. I understand you guys can't, but I could personally. So thanks for the time. Thanks for addressing it.
Well, thank you very much. And if you would, please do pass on to the governor that that the concern here is very significant and that we're taking this very seriously. And we really would never want to see something like that happen again.
I appreciate that. I'll do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
One thing I'd like to add is that most of the people that I have encountered who were violating the rule, either a minor thing or a runway incursion, generally I go with a verbal warning. And for the most part, most people comply. I've not had any problems. But there are a few, like I said, that do it chronically, and this really needs to stop. And like Rick said, we need some teeth into this into these rules. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Then back to the board. Any other questions or comments from the authority? Hearing none, we'd be in need of a motion on this matter.
Before we make a motion, are we changing any of the writing in this requirement?
My recommendation is that you make the motion with the language that I read to you, the modified language, which would be that underlined sentence at the bottom of the page should read, immediate revocation by the airport manager shall occur for single violations that present immediate danger, near miss with an aircraft, or other safety violation involving serious risk of damage to property or persons. And the next sentence be changed to say, in the event of suspension or revocation, the suspended or revoked individual or company shall have the right to request review by the Carson City Airport Authority at the next notice meeting, whose decision shall be final. And so with those changes, I would recommend that you adopt the changes proposed. So moved works.
That's what I was going to say.
And
Okay.
just say it to the
I make a motion,
mic.
so moved.
Second.
And that was seconded by, motion by Mr. Posick, seconded by Mr. Peterson. Any further discussion from the authority? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, if there be any? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously, and the teeth are sharpened. And Mr. Rowe, that will give you a greater ability to do what you need to do.
Thank you.
Safety first. That brings us to the conclusion of our public hearings, and we now continue with our non-action items, starting with item G, the airport engineer's report.
Okay. I emailed the engineer's report last week and handed out hard copies tonight. The first item is the North Apron design. I provided a schedule, and we're on track to meet that schedule. Second item is there's a NATAC meeting. NATAC stands for Nevada Airports Technical Advisory Committee. And one of their functions is to disperse funds from the Nevada Aviation Trust Fund. And so that's the purpose of this meeting. And what they'll consider is assisting NIPIAS airports, Carson City being one of them, with their match for any existing grants that they may have. So most likely, the most that any one airport might get is in the range of $5,000 to $10,000, but it's still a contribution to assist the GA airports in matching funds for any FAA grants. And then the third item is the FAA sent out a letter recently giving dates for various events. And the first one is the ASIP meetings that are coming up. And actually, in the letter, they said November 2nd through 30th, but they have subsequently let us know that we could have ASIP meetings in December also. And so that's what we've chosen. We will be meeting with the FAA on December 2nd. Right now, that's what's scheduled. So at that meeting, what we'll do is discuss next year's grant and our plans for the next 5 years after that. So that's all I've got. Any questions on what I presented?
Mr. Posick?
Yeah, where's the meeting and what time?
I'm sorry, which one? NATAC is going to be held at NDOT over here on Hot Springs Road. Yeah.
Their training facility.
So what's interesting about NATAC is it makes it sound like there's this official committee, but the committee is comprised of whoever is attending.
Let me just jump on the statute says that the Nevada Aviation Technical Advisory Committee, NATAC, shall make recommendations to the director of NDOT for disbursement of funds from the Nevada Aviation Trust Fund. We were successful in getting funding from the legislature, appropriations from the legislature of $100,000 per year for the next 2 years, this next biennium. And so in the past, you know, people have asked the question, including among those of us who've been there, who really makes up NATAC? And it's been a difficult thing to answer because if you look in the statutes, there is no definition of who the members are, how they're made members. So what's happened is historically representatives from the airports, typically also members of the Nevada Airports Association, have shown up at these meetings, and we've just convened them and said, okay, this is a meeting of NATAC, who's here and who do you represent? And we kind of go around the table and then we move forward. What it does is it gives a flavor to the recommendation that comes out of the meeting. And the flavor, you know, if it's primarily rural companies or airports that are there, sometimes the flavor of that recommendation is reflected in that. And so it's hopefully NDOT director can look at it and say, well, only the rural guys showed up. No wonder they recommended all the money goes to, you know, Jackpot Airport, you know. Those funds, it's an interesting situation because the funds, we don't really fight with each other for the funds in terms of airports. Really, we try and look at it globally. You know, the airport network system is the strongest if we know that we have good pavement throughout the state so that when we have the flying community out there, they know they've got a safe place to land in Carson City and they've got a safe place to land in Jackpot. And so if somebody comes to that meeting and says, look, here's the real problem, Jackpot is falling apart, it's becoming too dangerous to land on, it could well be that that group of people will get together and say, you know, maybe Carson City and Douglas County, maybe we don't need it as bad. We all vote and recommend that you really put a bunch of the money to Jackpot, at least in theory. Now, in practice, once you put anything in a government process, the government always wants to slice it and dice it so there's some background story that they can give about how they were fair to everybody. And the end result has been the last couple of times we've done disbursements, they've been pretty much close to the same amount of money for each airport. But I give you that other part of the story because I think that's really an important thing that the director of NDOT should be focusing on. And I think we have to set aside sometimes our own immediate financial needs and look at the bigger picture and say, you know, we're going to be better off in the long run if we take care of that weak link in the chain. And I've made that pitch each time, by the way. Each time they slice it and dice it and everybody gets the same amount. So, but that was part of the discussion that was had at the legislature when that law was first adopted. So, and you're certainly welcome to come, Steve, and anybody else who wants to come. They're interesting meetings, and they're usually not too long. Yeah, essentially you do because there's no criteria to limit you. I mean, at some point, my guess is NDOT or somebody's going to say, hey, look, we got to come up with a structure and establish rules for who gets to be on NATAC. And that's a whole nother rulemaking process that none of us really want to slow this thing up for. Really, you got $100,000 out there. What's the best thing to do? Get it in the ground. You know, use that for matching funds. You know, every 6,000 gets $100,000 worth of actual, real facilities in the ground that gives jobs to people to construct things that are going to last a long time. And so we've usually marched down that path of the sooner you get this money out and get it out in the field and develop, the better. So don't get too caught up on the who really is an ATAC thing. So.
Okay. That's actually, yeah, we're actually still talking to Jim.
Yeah, I'm done. That
Okay.
was just the modified version of the engineer's report. so.
Right, correct.
The repressed engineer report.
Okay, and so December 2nd is Phoenix ADO, and our chance to pitch our ACIP, and maybe or maybe not get asked about how we're doing on the mold. But by then we'll have a sense of how to go forward. Which brings us to the airport manager's report. Mr. Rowe.
Hey, update on Yvette Weaver's Albatross. Yvette Weaver the other day, on Monday, signed over, I don't know if it's a responsibility, power of attorney, I really don't know, has signed the Albatross over to a John King, who is an associate of Dennis Buin. Mr. King, as of yesterday, had a hazmat team come in and basically cleared the bird residue from inside the aircraft. It's actually sitting upright. A lot of weight in there. It is supposed to be moved by the end of the week. Where, I don't know, but wherever it goes, it will be parted out, then scrapped and removed from the airport. I don't know the timeline on scrapping, but I will keep up on it. On October 28th, next Wednesday, I believe it is, the FAA safety team will have a safety forum at Mountain West and El Laro. They're going to discuss some things that have been brought up by a couple of operators on the field, Sport Aviation Center and Carson Aviation Adventures, about possibly modifying the traffic patterns. There's been a lot of opinions bandied about. I'm not going to bore you with them because really it's even confusing me, some of the ideas that they've come up with. I've shut down a couple of ideas because I think they're too confusing. But these possible changes will be discussed, and once a decision is made, an agreement among the entities comes up, then we will bring it to the authority for discussion and approval. One of those ideas, which I like, is a separate traffic pattern for turbine-powered aircraft. Some airports already have those that are published, and this would be no different than those. But again, once the numbers are generated, I've got Brian Fitzgerald he's going to help me with a map using Google Earth to draw out these ideas, and then I'll be bringing to them to the authority next month for your discussion to determine if we're going to adopt that or not. On November 7th in Minden, there will be a Youth Aviation Day that is designed to introduce Douglas County school kids to opportunities available in aviation. A lot of stations will be set up. It's fun stuff for kids, and I have been asked to provide a presentation on airport operations. And they're going to give me a guidebook to go by because I guess I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm going to learn something new. This is something that I've been toying with the idea of maybe having here at some point. We'll discuss that down the road. But I'm encouraging everybody to please come down, take a look, and enjoy the day. On November 11th at the terminal building, the Civil Air Patrol will officially establish the Carson City wing, and they're having a commencement ceremony for that. Mayor Crowell has been invited, and they have also expressed an invitation to the authority to please show. So, and that's all I have for now. If there's any questions on any of these matters.
I have a question on those. in particular, but I was curious if there had been any additional, you know what I always ask about, any additional information about the instrument approach world.
Well, I was surprised. I have not officially received anything on the night approaches. However, I was surprised when I came in tonight, and Bill, would you like to comment? Sure. He surprised me with something that I had absolutely no clue, because I haven't heard a thing.
Mr. Hartman.
Bill Hartman again. I was out flying midday today, and I shot the GPS runway 27 approach, and was surprised to find I had vertical guidance. And so I asked Tim before the meeting when that came into effect, and he had no idea that it even existed. I have a WAS GPS, a Garmin 530, I'm sorry, 530? Yeah, that's the right number, yeah. And when I came to the intersection that's about 10 miles out from the airport, whichever one that is.
Ditka?
Yeah, I think that's the one, yeah. Okay, my bar indicating glide slope, the GS flag moved out of the way, the bar went up indicating that I was below glide slope. Wow, this works. And down in the corner of the approach picture on the GPS, it said LP plus V. So it's not an LPV approach, but it's LP plus V. So that's the vertical guidance is not precision, but it's still vertical guidance. So I set up my autopilot to intercept the glide slope and fly it, and indeed, when the bar came down, got in the middle, my green light came on, my airplane flew the glide slope. And clearance from the ground was great, really nice, and it worked. So we don't know where this came from, but it's there, and it worked out very nicely.
And previously on your Garmin equipment, you had not gotten any vertical guidance.
That's correct. Okay. But I need to add that I just had the engine overhauled, and it's been about, I'd have to look at my logbook. I may have flown that approach since I got the engine overhaul. I think I did. Yeah, so with a couple of weeks ago, I probably flew the approach, and I had no vertical guidance. Yeah. So, yeah, this is the first time I've seen vertical guidance on it.
Well, thanks for sharing.
And before that, there was absolutely none.
Okay.
So, okay.
Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it works.
Now, if nobody else gets that, then I guess that was a free benefit of your specific engine overhaul.
I think probably so, yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I guess so. You probably also put the 530 in.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so Tim, that's interesting, and probably something to understand what that might indicate. But no further information that's come out about either the circling minima for C&D or you know what I mean, CAT C&D approval or the night approval.
Well, a couple of years ago, actually probably 3 years ago, when we were actually working on the runway 27 approach, they told me that it would be ready in 6 months. It was ready in a year and a half. A few months ago, we looked at the C&D. They said it would be ready in October. I don't expect it to be ready till sometime next year. Now, having said that, and I think we talked about this before, the flight check aircraft from Sacramento did run the approaches and check the new Aegis survey against those approaches, and the findings probably have been published. I just haven't seen them. I tried calling Beth Houghton at the flight procedures office a couple of times. She's rarely in the office, trying to get some clarification on what's going on. But having said that, I've received no official word on the night restrictions or anything else, or the C&D approaches. We do expect them, but again, I think that they're going to have really, really high minimums. Now, I did shoot the GPS approach, and we had no vertical guidance. And one of the problems that we have is the missed approach waypoint is just a hair slightly past the end of the runway, just east but past the runway center line. I don't see anything using that waypoint that could enable that to be a numbered approach. It has to be a circling approach. And how it would be entered is up to the person flying the approach. So, you know, we're hopeful that these things will be resolved real soon, but the FAA moves very slowly.
Well, thanks for the update. I mean, the reason I, of course, asked last month was the news that came through on my email briefing that it looked like the status had been changed to canceled or something like that on the development. So any news you get. Member Peterson?
I just wanted to add a little remark on the Albatross. At the last meeting, I volunteered to approach Ms. Weaver, and I spoke to her last week. We circulated a little bit of an email on that. Her comments were not entirely coherent. She said, I've sold the aircraft, except we haven't agreed on the price yet, which in the world I live in means it's not sold yet. I asked her if she had an actual written agreement on that. She said, no, we haven't agreed on the price yet. And I said, well, I'm glad to hear that you got some progress. The authority is anxious to clear up the matter. And then I got a long story about what they were worth and the 14 they'd owned and the family history and the cousins. And anyway, she mentioned that she had spoken to you. You and I corresponded on that. I just want to point out, if there has been an agreement signed and that aircraft is going away, chances are we've gotten where we wanted to be on that. But I wasn't confident in hanging up with Ms. Weaver that there's actually an official transaction yet. And it could be another month or 2 or 3 or 4, and we keep getting well, it's sold, only we don't have an agreement or a price yet. So I would ask that you monitor that, and if you closely with notes of when you meet with people and when you speak to people and what the dates they give you, and if somebody says it'll be moved in 2 weeks, I'd recommend that in front of them you write down so it'll be gone on so-and-so date, and that at some point if it's not happening, whether it comes back to this authority or to you or I individually, say we got to have the written agreement or we need to take action. Otherwise, it could just be a delaying action.
When I talked to Mr. King, I made it very clear of the authority's intention to scrap the aircraft. And I told him that this airplane needed to be moved from its spot. You guys do what you need to do, but if it is not moved by the end of the month, I will be calling the scrap company to come in and break it up, that it will be removed at the end of the month. So I was very clear on that. And now, having said that, something that you had talked to Mrs. Weaver, Rick Clemens at Cactus had offered Mrs. Weaver an opportunity to sign the airplane over to Cactus Air Force and receive a credit or a tax write-off, a substantial one from what I understand. Something happened, Mr. King got the airplane, and now it's in different hands. But they did repair the one tire that was flat. It is ready to roll now, and it's, like I said, I was supposed to be rolled off of Bravo by the end of this week. This is what I was assured of. But I did make it clear that the airplane needed to be gone or it was going to be scrapped.
Mr. Pazzi? Sorry, Mr. Stotts.
Yeah, in case this all falls through and we end up having to scrap it, I talked to the fire department. The guys in Station 52 were very excited about getting it. They wanted to know if there were pull handles for them to practice on, but they referred me to their training director. So I called him up, it took a couple of calls, and he didn't seem to be very interested. He said they wouldn't be able to do anything with it for a month. Maybe they wouldn't have space for it. But since I brought it up last time, I thought I would follow up this time. There's still a possibility, I think, that they might like it. If the guys in the station had anything to say about it, it would be there now.
Steve, did I skip you?
No,
Okay.
did I think out loud?
No, I know. I just saw different lights coming on up here. Well, no, that's great, Phil, for following up on that. And you know, I think that's something to kind of keep in our hip pocket if, you know, if things go sideways. You know, probably the real deal is they'll take it and then saw the outer wing panels off or something to shorten it up a little. But yeah, that'd be a good resource for them. So, other questions for Mr. Rowe? If not, then legal counsel's report, Mr. Tagas.
Just two quick things. One, on the Albatross, I was out flying today, and that thing looks like it's ready to roll. Some of the tires look like they're actually new. It's clearly been cleaned up to some extent. I didn't get over close to it, but some other folks who were out there in the field came over and said, yeah, it's sealed up real tight. The only problem is there's still birds inside. So, so if you get a chance to tell Mr. King, you know, if they did a nice job sealing it up, but they should have gotten the birds, because they said there were birds flying around inside, somewhat frantic. So, but it looks like it's, yeah, it looks, you know, from outward appearances, it looks like it's really ready to roll. The tires are inflated and they look good. The other thing I wanted to mention is on the safety seminar that the FAA is sponsoring on the 28th at El Aero, there's, as Tim mentioned, there's going to be talk about the traffic pattern. The traffic pattern is within the Carson City Municipal Code, Title 19. It's on pages 30 and 31, and it shows the various arrival and departure areas for the airport. So if there is a proposal to change it, it would need to come back here. It would need to go to the FAA. There's a bunch of entities that would have to look at it before it could be changed. But it's always a good idea to start the discussion somewhere. If somebody's got a better idea or better ideas, this is how they get started. And I shared that information on the existing traffic pattern with one of the people who's presenting part of that, Mo Mikowski, who's an instructor from the Reno area. I don't have anything else to report.
Just aside, Larry Cheek, safety team member with the FAA, will be conducting that forum. And it is, like I said, their recommendations will have to come to the authority.
Does every airport actually have to file with the FAA or have reviewed by the FAA? You know, all uncontrolled airfields have to have a traffic pattern, you know, graphically depicted, such as, I mean, we typically talk about, okay, it's a left-hand pattern to 27, it's 1,000-foot AGL or it's 1,200-foot AGL, but is there a layer that, just out of curiosity, where that has to be reviewed and filed for every airport, every uncontrolled airport?
Not to my knowledge. We did check when we changed the traffic pattern altitude, and we were told that was our call. Because the traffic pattern altitude, I think the standard one is like 800 feet. Is that right? Ordinarily, if it's unstated, it's 800 feet. And we raised it to 1,000 to be nice to the neighbors. And but we made that change in 2006. We made it a long time ago. And once you get that information, you know, like the airport manager can get that information in the hands of the airport facilities directory, I think that's how it gets into the system. The one thing you want to do is check with the FAA. Is you want to make sure you're not adopting something that is dangerous for some reason. And you know, a good example of that is the South Lake Tahoe traffic pattern. It's an unusual pattern. If you have strong winds out of the south, there are strong downdrafts. And the traffic pattern, if you're taking off on runway 3, what's the runway going south, 18?
18.
Yeah, if you're taking off on 18, the traffic pattern says you do a left-hand pattern. You turn left and you go around. If there are really strong winds out of the south, the downdrafts will be extremely dangerous. And it's at least the preliminary view of some of the local pilots up here that that's what happened to that V-35 that crashed there about a week ago. And the comment from one of the seasoned pilots up there to me was, well, all the locals, we all know if there's a strong downwind, you ignore the traffic pattern and you do a right-hand pattern, you fly around that hill, and that's a safer place anyway. And the only reason the traffic pattern doesn't show right-hand around that hill is because when they had a traffic control tower there, the control tower couldn't see traffic behind the hill, so that's why they put it on the other side, which in the view of a lot of local pilots is a very dangerous place to have it. So if you had a situation like that, it would be very important, I think, to run it through the FAA so that you have that second set of eyes looking at it saying, from a safety standpoint, this is or is not a good idea. In my opinion, somebody's going to end up suing South Lake Tahoe Airport at some point because that if what they say is true, that's, you know, you've got an airport that's putting out a traffic pattern that may have been either contributing factor or the primary factor for that accident. I'm sure it'll always be pilot error. NTSB's report will say the pilot didn't take into account these strong winds or something. But it seems like, you know, if we were a South Lake Tahoe, we would want our AWAS, you know, to have a recorded message saying if there's extremely strong winds, the left-hand pattern is not safe or something like that, or some kind of cautionary language. But answer your question, yeah, if there's a safety-related thing, you should run it. I haven't found anything where you have to, but it ends up in the airport directory, facilities directory, and then that's, you know, that's of course what we all look at for the small airports. You know, if you don't have an approach plate or you don't have something else that tells you, that's where you find it.
And in the Airman's Information Manual, they talk about traffic patterns, but it's nothing regulatory. It's standard patterns. You can do left or right patterns if you really want to. Whether you can come in on the north side, we recommend people not be on the north side of the airport for a traffic pattern. So, you know, we basically publish some ideas in the AFD to have all of our approaches, visual approaches on the south side. When the helicopters were busy flying, we worked out a deal mostly for noise abatement. That's what all this came about, to use the north side but stay out of the residential areas. And it worked very well. The airport authority before I came on had moved the traffic pattern from 800 to 1,000, but was never published. I got it published, so now everybody's on the same page with that. Basically what this is going to do is make it, instead of a full mile traffic pattern from the airport, bring it in a little closer, 3/4 of a mile. A lot of the training people like to have a little closer in case they're doing a practice engine out procedure. Turbine guys, when I was flying jets, turboprops, I like 2,000 feet further out because I didn't want to mix in with the bug smashers. What the recommendations right now on paper, what they're asking for is maybe have 1.5 miles. Well, I'm going to let them decide what they want to recommend, and we'll bring it in. But really, it's not something that's written in stone. So it's something we have to be careful of, and we want to be good neighbors to the residents around the airport. And that's why we have 1,000 foot. Somebody had recommended let's go back to 800. I said, no, I don't want the phone calls. So we're going to keep that at 1,000 and deal with the rest of it at the next meeting.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think the upshot of all that is, you know, this is advisory in nature, and it's not regulatory in nature. Yeah. Mr. Peterson?
Well, I hadn't expected to, but I'm going to check when I get home. I think you've made a slight misstatement, but my comments are going to be based on some meetings I had with the FAA many, many years ago about another airport in Texas that I was engaged at. And the upshot of that is there's only one body of regulations on airport anything in the air, and that's the FARs. That's the rules. The AIM is advisory. If something goes wrong and you've acted contrary to the AIM, there will be additional violations tagged onto your name, that you've behaved in a reckless manner and such. My recollection of the FARs, and I'll go home and check it now, is that there is a voice in the FARs on that, which is that all turns of the traffic pattern shall be left unless otherwise denoted for a right pattern. Now, where and how and when you make them at what altitude is not spoken of. And anything that an airport does, whether it be noise abatement, pattern altitude, any of those sorts of things, is advisory. We cannot control those pilots. They're conducting the flight. responsible for the safe conduct of their aircraft themselves and their passengers. But we can advise, and it pays to follow that. So when we say we're going to revise the traffic pattern, or there's discussions of it, I doubt they're going to rewrite the FARs, which says it's left pattern unless it's denoted for right. That's it. And everything else is up to the pilot. Yes, we can and should post recommendations. Above 1,000 feet's fine. If you want to recommend a turbine altitude, you can, but that's all recommendation, and it's not regulatory on anybody out there. The only thing that's regulatory is the pilot's responsible for the safe conduct of the flight.
Well, that's correct, and that's the same reason we recommend on the AFD that 27 is the calm wind runway. It's not regulatory, we recommend it. Some do use runway 9, mostly to adhere to the IFR departure procedure, but not everyone uses the departure procedure. They just use 9 because it's quicker to get to. So all we do is just try to keep everybody in the same flow, in the same direction, and for safety reasons, and yes, for noise abatement. So yeah, we're not regulating, we're requesting.
That's right. That was the legal report. And nothing else from you, right? Well said.
Nothing else from me.
Okay. That brings us to the treasurer's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As of September 30, 2015, monthly expenditures were $34,468. We have a balance in the checkbook of $20,965. Total checkings and savings, $606,015. As promised last month, I would give you a quarterly update. If you'll go to what was page 6 on the attachment, Tim sent out the profit and loss versus budget actual. A couple of things kind of jumped out there to me. Our long-term parking fees are at 125% of the budget. I haven't had a chance to ask Tim why that would be, so I'll ask him now.
For long-term parking, anytime over 1 month, we charge $20 per month. We had an additional vehicle show up that we're charging $20 a month.
Okay.
So I'm charging them quarterly, so that's $60.
This is automobile parking?
In the parking lot, yes.
Okay. Rock sales on the second page of that, line 5404, we are at 77.1% of what we budgeted for the entire year. So that tells us that we are moving rocks. That's a good thing. That's on the income side. On the expenditure side, down to lines 6313 and 6314, insurance and auditing. Those look a little available, but Tim has assured me that we're actually okay with that because there shouldn't be much more in expenditures on the auditing and on the insurance side. That was some numbers carried in from actually last year, but we should be on target according to Tim. The only other one that I see there is line 6309 that we need to think about, legal fees. In working through this, there seems to be some lag time, generally speaking, that some of the September or earlier numbers really are not in here. But for legal fees, we're showing 27.4%. Actual billing has brought us to 33.5%. We're only at 25% of the year. So we need to take a look at what we're doing on legal fees. And that's my report.
Questions from Member White? Yes, the rock sales do appear to be brisk versus budget, and that's a good thing. Well, thank you very much for that. Report from authority members. Any observations or musings from about the field? Okay, hearing, yep, Mr. Posick.
Okay, I got one. It comes down to contracts for outside services. It seems like I missed last meeting, but the police department actions that we have at the airport were approved. We've had a contract for the engineer. I see no contract for council. This is an airport board advisory. Do we need to do something about that for future reference, so we have contracts for all other outside contracts that may show up? Just an observation.
Well, I think it's one that's worth, Mr. Takis, you've spoken to this before, the subject of retention of legal services and the customary ways in which that is done. And you've spoken, I don't remember who was here and who wasn't. You recall what I'm referring to, sort of, if you could basically make that remark again, it'd be useful.
Lawyers are usually engaged on engagement letters, not on contracts. Now, there's no reason we couldn't do a contract for legal services, just like we do a contract for anything else. And there's no reason why you can't decide if you want a different counsel. That's perfectly within your purview. So I don't know what else I'm being asked.
I think that's exactly what I was going for, was just what Mr. Takis said.
Okay. I know there was an original contract. I haven't seen an engagement letter. Is there one written for a year, or how does that work in your case?
There was an engagement letter that was approved by the authority and signed by the chairman. It was signed by Steve Lewis. And that was the last time, I think, that I was given any kind of raise or any kind of compensation consideration. It was many years. It should be in the airport's records. If it's not, I think I provided a copy to Mr. Vaccaro when he asked the last time. And so
I may have a copy in my files.
Okay, yeah. It's pretty much the same thing as a contract at the beginning. It's not exactly the same.
Well, it is like a contract because it's signed by both parties. But if you want something that looks more like a contract, or if you want something different, you guys get to decide. You just tell me. And the other thing, too, is if you want to consider other counsel, you're always entitled to do that. I mean, there's no requirement that you have to engage me.
Okay.
None here.
Okey-doke. That brings us to item L, the second episode of public comment. Members of the public who wish to address the airport authority may speak on agendized items. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic. And once again, if it requires extended discussion, we should consider it for calendaring at a future meeting.
You're saying this comment period is just anything that was on the agenda?
That's what it says here.
Okay.
Items discussed on the agenda.
Okay, well, I want to get past this 3-minute thing. So what do I have to do to get my subject matter put on the agenda?
Well, the process is to contact the airport manager to present items for agendization.
Okay, so all the things I mentioned earlier, you're not going to respond to those? You're not going to?
Well, no, I mean, the
react to-
broad, well, obviously, we're here as a community body to hear feedback from the community, and not to say that the comments made earlier somehow go in the circular file. I mean, it all gets taken into account, but I think that if you have a particular request, the airport manager is your
Well, there's several,
your vehicle.
and I'm saying I want to get past the 3-minute thing for presenting those issues. And I'm saying if you're telling me that the only way is to submit the manager.
If you have particular questions or items for discussion that you'd like to bring up, as I say, direct them to Mr. Rowe in writing. You can copy me on it as well as the chairman, and we'll certainly consider those things.
Okay, very well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Hearing none. Agenda items for our next regular meeting. Mr. Rowe?
I have one that I would like to begin discussion on. Come March, our contract with Cinderlight ends, and I would like to agendize a possible extension of that contract. They're moving a lot of rock right now. It is beneficial as income to the airport, and I'd like to see this continue to the ultimate end, obviously. It's just not going to happen by March. So I would like to agendize that for extension.
That's through March 16th currently.
Correct.
We have the tabled matter with regard to the mold, and so provided that we have some updated information, we can talk about that more then. And of course, anything that comes up in between now and then. Would we anticipate Kupal?
There has still not been an agreement signed between Mr. and Mrs. Kupal and the Heritage Hangars. I received a call this morning saying that they still have not reached an agreement, and it's been a few months, so I am not proceeding with anything until we have that agreement in writing. That was as directed by the authority.
Gotcha. And refresh my memory, did the appraisal go forward? Okay.
Not until the agreement is signed.
Right. Okay. Well, other items will probably emerge as time goes on. If there are no other specific ones at this time, then
What about the cricket contract?
so cricket, we are now at a point of basically we'll hear from at some point, I'm sure in the interim, we'll hear from Mr. Rowe what the or Mr. Tagus what the formal termination date would be. Notice of termination. Yeah.
It's now back in the report. Yeah, but it could be on the agenda if something is set.
That's absolutely correct. So that is a potential one. You bet. Yeah. I feel like there was something that's really not an agenda item that was more of a follow-up from a past thing, but I'll remember it and talk to you off that line, Tim. With that being said, if there's nothing else at this time, it's item N, everyone's favorite motion.
I'd requested the sign be on the agenda for next time.
Roger. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Oh, I made it. Excellent. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.